All stories are dramatized recreations. Named locations are fictionalized. Any resemblance to real persons is coincidental.
Hi, I'm Madison, a 37-year-old electrician from TX. Sharing this is hard, but I need to process how my husband David's affair with a colleague shattered our 12-year marriage. It began when I found lipstick on his collar, a shade I'd never wear after his late work meetings. Funny how a 5-tube of Maybelline can unravel everything. I'd just rewired a Victorian bungalow downtown, hands calloused but proud, while he texted her emojis I hadn't seen in years. The Alamo silhouette at dusk used to mean home. Now it's just a backdrop for betrayal. That first voicemail from her, David forgot his charger at my place, cracked my world like faulty wiring. I stood in our garage, surrounded by my tools, realizing I'd fixed every broken circuit in this city except my own marriage. The garage smelled of ozone and loneliness that night. David's car was still absent, third Thursday this month, when my phone buzzed. Not him. A photo from Lena, his assistant, team drinks. "Missed you, boss." There he was, arms slung around her shoulder at bar 19-9, her coral lips grazing his ear. Same lipstick shade staining his collar last week. My knees hit the concrete floor beside my work van. Funny how the body collapses before the mind accepts it, like a tripped breaker cutting power mid-job. I'd spent that day rewiring a pediatric clinic, soothing fretful nurses about downtime. "Don't worry," I'd said. "I'll restore everything." If only marriages had junction boxes. No schematics for this. The clinic's cheerful dinosaur murals mocked me now. 12 years. 12 years of saving for this house, his law school loans, the IVF treatments that failed. All while I balanced conduit bends and his ambitions. When his headlights finally sliced the dark, I waited in the kitchen. His tie was loosened, humming some radio jingle. "Long case meeting," he yawned. I slid my phone across the counter, Lena's photo glowing. His face went gray as old putty. "It's not. Don't." My voice surprised me, steady, like testing live wires. "Just tell me how long." 3 months. 3 months of deposition preps and client dinners. He wept, clinging to my work-roughened hands. "He means nothing. I thought of the nursery we painted last year, now a storage room. How we'd held each other after the last negative test." "You meant everything," I whispered. That night, I slept in the guest room. Not angry, empty, like a light fixture with dead wires. His snores rumbled through the wall. I stared at my tool chest across the hall. My father gave it to me when I topped my trade school class. "Remember, Maddie," he'd said, "you can rebuild anything except time." Dawn came. I drove to the unfinished boutique hotel job. Ascended scaffolding alone. Beneath me, the Riverwalk pulsed with tourists clutching margaritas. I spliced copper tails with trembling fingers. One wrong move and 480 volts could stop your heart. Safer than marriage, apparently. When my foreman called, "Madison, you okay?" "You're never late?" I almost laughed. "What's late when your life's already derailed?" "Flu," I croaked. "Flu. Flu." A convenient lie. Infidelity has no sick days. By lunch, David had texted 14 times, "Please talk to me." I blocked him. Focused on securing buzz bars. Metal grounded me. Conductors follow rules. Current only flows where you direct it. No surprises. At home, his suitcase sat packed. "Staying at Mark's," his note said. I traced the Looney Tunes bandage on my thumb, a cut from yesterday's faulty panel. Blood had seeped through. Funny, that tiny wound hurt more than this cavernous silence. I poured Merlot into a coffee mug, drank it on the porch swing. Fireflies blinked in the pecan trees like distant fault indicators. I remembered our first apartment, how we'd tangled extension cords across shag carpet for Christmas lights. "My little electric elf," he'd teased, kissing my solder-burned knuckles. Now I was just another blown fuse. Replaceable, disposable. The neighbor's labradoodle barked. David's car idled at the curb. He walked up, holding lilies, my favorites. "Madison, don't stand there." My voice cracked like dry insulation. "You lost the right to see me cry." He left the flowers on the steps. They'd die without water, just like us. Later, I found her earring under our bed, a cheap silver feather. He probably fell when they... No, don't picture it. I flushed it down the toilet, watched it swirl away. Still felt dirty. Midnight found me stripping bedroom wires, rewiring for smart switches, something I could control, something that obeyed commands. My headlamp cut through the gloom as I spliced neutrals, red to red, black to black. Simple, predictable. David texted from a blocked number. I'll quit the firm. We'll move, please. I didn't reply, just tightened the screw terminals until my knuckles whitened. The substation hummed like a living thing, that particular 60 Hz vibration felt in molars and breastbone as I secured the last bushing on the step-down transformer. Sweat trickled beneath my far shirt where David's hands used to rest during movie nights, back when his touch didn't make my skin recoil like live wire contact. 3 weeks since he'd left, and still his ghost lingered. In the half-empty Crest tube in the bathroom, the indentation on his side of the sofa, the way silence in our hallway echoed with dead pixels from 1,000 deleted "I love you" texts. Madison load test complete. Benny's voice crackled through my radio, pulling me back. My apprentice's eyes held that careful pity I'd grown to detest. Everyone at the union knew. I focused on torquing the flange bolts. Click, click, click each quarter, turn measured. Precision mattered here. One loose connection could cascade into a blackout across 6 blocks. Marriage should have had such fail-safes. Lunch break found me perched on a utility crate, concrete grit biting into my palms as I unwrapped a cold breakfast taco. The air tasted of ozone and diesel, strangely comforting. A notification flashed, David's lawyer. Mediation terms attached. My stomach clenched like a fist around bad fish. Across the street, a couple argued outside a cafe, her hands slicing air while he stared at his shoes. I remembered standing exactly like that outside his firm's holiday party, whispering, "Who is she?" as snow melted in my hair. He brushed frost from my collar. "You're imagining things," with those elegant fingers that now signed legal papers to dismantle us. Back in the service van, Benny cleared his throat. "Heard you turned down the Phoenix project." "Job's too long." I snapped my multimeter case shut. Lie. The truth coiled in my throat. Phoenix was where David proposed under citrus blossoms, where he'd promised forever between sips of cheap champagne. Now forever smelled of scorched insulation and lawyer's cologne. "Thought you'd want the distance." He hesitated, wiping grease off a fuse puller. "My cousin went through this, said it gets better when you stop picking at the wound." I stared at my reflection in the tool cabinet, hair escaping its braid, smudges beneath eyes that hadn't slept properly since finding that earring. Pick at the wound, as if betrayal were a scab and not a severed artery. That night, the house exhaled emptiness. I avoided the bedroom. Our bed still held the phantom weight of his body and worked in the garage instead. Stripping 4NO gauge cable, the copper gleaming like new pennies under my headlamp. Focus on what you can control. The mantra thrummed with each wire slice. But then my knuckle grazed the dented cooler we'd taken camping, David laughing as beer cans floated in icy river water. And suddenly I was sobbing, forehead pressed against the vise, tears salting the concrete. His call came at 11:03 p.m. I watched the screen pulse, David Che, until voicemail swallowed it. His message rasped through the speaker, "Madison, please. I drove by today, saw your van at the substation. Remember when you shocked yourself fixing our porch light? I held ice on your finger for an hour. You said I was your human ground rod." Silence. A shaky breath. "I was. I am. Let me come home." The garage fluorescents buzzed like angry hornets. I gripped my lineman's pliers until the crosshatch handle left diamonds in my palm. Human ground rod. A joke then. A cruelty now. Ground rods channel lightning harmlessly into Earth. He'd conducted his chaos straight into my core. I didn't sleep. Instead, I rewired the vintage jukebox I'd been restoring for months, David's birthday gift. Now its guts sprawled across sawhorses. Colored wires tangled like our last argument. "You're never present," he'd shouted, always elbows deep in someone else's walls. As if my absence justified his hands on Lena's lower back in that bar photo. Soldering iron hissing, I spliced new leads. Red to red, blue to blue. When dawn bled through the high windows, I pressed play. Patsy Cline's Crazy crackled from the speakers, a bitter joke only I understood. At the hardware store later, selecting junction boxes, I overheard two women, caught him with the nanny, left his suits on the lawn, doused them in kerosene. They laughed, brittle as old Bakelite. I traced a steel conduit's cool edge. No pyres for me. My vengeance was quieter, survival measured in amberage and signed divorce papers. Driving home, I passed bar 99. His BMW idled outside. Through the tinted window, I saw Lena's coral mouth moving animatedly, his new ground rod, while he nodded, fingers drumming the steering wheel. Same rhythm he'd tapped during our IF consultations. The light turned green. I accelerated past, their reflection fragmenting in my rear view like shattered safety glass. The scent of rain on hot asphalt mingled with the sharp tang of solder as I threaded new conduit along the garage ceiling. Methodical, rhythmic work that let my mind drift into the hum of the task. 3 months of separation had etched new lines around my eyes, but my hands remained steady. David's abandoned toolbox sat in the corner, a monolith of neglect beneath a dusty drop cloth. I hadn't touched it. Some circuits are better left dead. Benny arrived just as thunder rolled in the distance, shaking wetness from his jacket. Got the permits for the Anderson retrofit. They want arc fault breakers retrofitted by Friday. He paused, eyeing the maze of empty tubing I'd suspended. You rewiring the whole garage? Something like that. My hacksaw bit into metal, spraying silver shavings. Control, order. Predictable paths. The garage was becoming a cathedral of precision, every coupling aligned, every strap spaced exactly 16 inches apart. No hidden betrayals in rigid steel. David called the office, Benny said softly, testing a length of wire. Asked if you'd taken the Lake Travis job. The saw jerked, nicking my thumb. A bead of blood welled, vivid against the gray conduit. What'd you tell him? Told him to talk to you. He handed me a rag, his gaze heavy with unspoken worry. He sounded. Lost. Lost. The word echoed as rain lashed the roof. I remembered David navigating fogged mountain roads during our Smoky Mountains trip, his knuckles white on the wheel, my hand guiding his knee. Trust me, I'd whispered. Now he was adrift, without his human compass. Served him right. Later, inventorying fuses at the supply house, Lena's laughter cut through the industrial clamor. She stood by the counter, flirting with the clerk, her coral nails tapping polished concrete. Our eyes met a split-second collision. Her smile faltered, mine hardened into something cold and smooth as porcelain. No words, just the buzz of fluorescence and the phantom sting of her earrings swirling down my toilet. I turned away, focusing on the weight of a 200-amp breaker in my hands. Solid. Anchoring, that night, sorting through attic boxes marked memories, I found our wedding album. Dust motes danced in the flashlight beam as I flipped pages. David feeding me cake, his eyes crinkled with unguarded joy. Our first dance, my calloused fingers laced through his lawyer. Soft hands, his grandmother pinning the something blue brooch to my dress, a tiny silver lightning bolt. I traced its outline now, the metal cool against my palm. 12 years dissolved into this musty darkness. A crash downstairs shattered the silence. Heart hammering, I descended to find David in the kitchen, broken mug at his feet. Sorry, I still have the key, he stammered, coffee soaking into his dress shoes. I came for my deposition notes. He looked thinner. Shadows pooled beneath eyes that darted anywhere but mine. The air crackled with unsaid apologies. They're in the study, I said, voice flat. Top drawer. He moved past me, his cologne, our cologne, triggering memories of lazy Sunday mornings. I crouched to gather ceramic shards. Madison, he stopped in the doorway. The lilies, you never took them in. They died. I didn't look up. Silence stretched like taffy. Rain drummed harder. I miss your laugh, he whispered. The way you'd snort when, don't. The shard in my hand bit deep, blood blooming alongside brown stains. You don't get to miss me. He flinched. She's gone. Transferred to Chicago. And? I stood, blood dripping onto linoleum. Does that magically re-splice the wires you severed? Does it unsee the photo of her lips on your ear? His composure cracked. I was lonely. You were always here, he gestured wildly at the garage, buried in wires and work orders. I needed, you needed? My laugh was a harsh bark. I needed you not to shatter us because you felt ignored while I paid off your student loans. While I rebuilt this house after the flood. While I grieved babies that never came. I thrust my bleeding hand toward him. See this? This I can fix. You're a short circuit I can't isolate. He stared at my palm, at the blood and calluses, like he'd never truly seen them before. His shoulders slumped. I get my notes? I bandaged my hand alone at the sink, watching his taillights vanish down the street. Water swirled pink down the drain. This is how you bleed out the poison, I thought. Slow, messy, necessary. Later, in the rewired garage, I hung the lightning bolt brooch from a hook above my workbench. It caught the lead glow, a tiny, defiant spark in the ordered darkness. I picked up my strippers, sliced into fresh 10-gauge wire, and began again. The mediator's office smelled of stale coffee and suppressed panic, overly chilled air prickling the scar on my thumb where David's shattered mug had bitten weeks earlier. Benny sat rigid beside me, union rep badge gleaming like a shield. Across the laminate table, David's lawyer arranged pens with surgical precision while David himself stared at the fire escape diagram on the wall, jaw working as if chewing through barbed wire. His wedding band was absent. A pale stripe on his tanned finger caught the fluorescent glare like a fresh wound. Mrs. Lawson, the mediator began. Ms. Reed, I corrected, the name I'd reclaimed like stripped copper, essential, mine. My knuckles whitened around the pen. Reed v. Lawson, a case number now, not a life. Ms. Reed. Your proposal regarding the residence, David's knee bumped the table leg. A tremor traveled through my untouched water glass. Focus on the harmonics, I told myself, the way unbalanced loads hummed before failing. His lawyer slid a spreadsheet toward me. Columns of numbers dissected 12 years, mortgage payments, HVAC replacement costs, the market value spike after I rewired the entire house. David's contribution, 18-2416, 2416, 2418 tuition assistance. Benny leaned forward. Her sweat equity doubled that property's functionality. That's quantifiable. He tapped the inspection report I'd spent nights compiling, every upgraded circuit, GFC outlet, and energy-efficient retrofit meticulously documented. David finally met my eyes. I never wanted the house. Ooh, he swallowed. The porch swing. And Grandma's brooch. The swing where he'd proposed. The brooch pinning our vows. Acid rose in my throat. Outside, a bucket truck's whine cut through noon heatline workers repairing storm damage. I envied their clarity, downed wire, isolate, repair. No mediation for lightning. Take them, I said. His flinch was almost satisfying. You don't get to mourn relics while discarding the woman who polished them. The lawyer cleared his throat. Mr. Lawson also waives claims to retirement accounts in exchange for the Tesla. A jagged laugh escaped me. The Tesla. Bought with my overtime checks after his promotion, its charging station installed by my blistered hands. Now it would ferry him to God knows whose apartment. Benny's boot pressed mine under the table, steadying, like a grounding rod sunk deep. Done, I said. David's exhale fogged his water glass. Signing the asset split felt like stripping armored cable, peeling back layers of insulation to expose raw conductors. Each initial hissed, DECEM BE R20111 nullified. When my pen hovered over the final line, David whispered, Madison, wait. The door burst open. Lena stood framed in fluorescent glare, hair plastered to her temples by humid wind. David, the deposition moved to... Her gaze snagged on me. Coral lips parted. Silence crackled like a loose connection arcing. Benny stood, chair screeching. This is a closed session. David rose, palms out. Lena, this isn't... Lena? The mediator's eyebrows climbed. Counselor, if this is a tactical... I watched Lena's eyes dart from David's guilty flush to my work boots still dusted with garage concrete. Her designer heels seemed suddenly absurd in this room of vinyl and regret. A memory surfaced, David complaining about her billing errors, like she's never held a calculator. Now, here she stood, miscalculating again. Your mistress, I clarified for the mediator, crashing your divorce mediation. David's lawyer dropped his pen. Lena recoiled. I'm his paralegal, who texts missed you, bosses after hours. My voice stayed low. lethal as a fault current. Who leaves earrings in married men's beds? David gripped the table edge. Lena, leave. But she stepped forward, clutching a file folder like a shield. You think he's the victim? He cried in my car for an hour after you changed the locks. Said you were ice. Enough. David's shout echoed off acoustic tiles. Lena froze. In that suspended second I saw it, the flicker of revulsion in her eyes as she registered his cowardice. A small, vicious warmth bloomed in my chest. Benny guided me into the hall. Breathe, Maddie, breathe, breathe. The vending machine hummed. I pressed my forehead to cool glass, staring at rotating pretzel bags. David's voice carried through the door. Unprofessional, Lena. You could cost me. Cost him. Always, the calculus. I thought of the Tesla's sleek silence. No rattle of tools in back, no scent of solder clinging to upholstery. Let it swallow him whole. Back inside, Lena was gone. David's collar gaped where he'd torn a button. Madison, I, sign. I thrust the pen at him. He scrawled his name like a man etching his own epitaph. Outside, thunder growled. First fat raindrops smeared the window, distorting the parking lot where Lena's Audi fishtailed out. At the exit, David hesitated under the awning. Rain slicked his hair to his forehead, erasing the lawyer-sharp edges. The brooch, Grandma wanted you to have it. I pulled my hood up. I already took it off your toolbox. His flinch was the last spark between us. I walked away into downpour, Benny's umbrella angling over me. Rain drummed on nylon, a clean sound, washing concrete dust from my sleeves. At my service van, I traced the lightning bolt decal on the door. Read Electric, my name. My current. Drink? Benny asked as engines hissed on wet asphalt. I handed him the Tesla keys. Sell it. Buy the crew safety harnesses. His grin was a live wire in the gloom. Yes, boss. Alone in the van, I sat watching raindrops chase each other down the windshield. No tears, just the steady purr of the engine and the ozone scent of storms. I pulled out my phone, unblocked David's number one last time, and texted, garage code changed. Your tools are on the curb. Then I drove toward the substation flood alert, the wipers keeping time with my pulse. Swish thump. Swish thump. Alive. The substation flood had left a carcass of mud-caked transformers and frayed cables, a disaster zone humming with the growl of diesel generators and shouted orders. Knee-deep in slurry, I wrenched a corroded grounding rod while sleet needled my neck. Benny tossed me a thermos. Coffee's black as burnt insulation today, boss. Perfect. I gulped the bitter heat, watching my breath fog the air. Reed Electric crews swarmed like worker ants under portable halogens, my name stitched on every sleeve. 3 weeks since mediation. 3 weeks of burying myself in conduit bends and fault tracing until muscle memory overrode heartache. David's tools had sat curbside in the rain until scrap metal collectors took them. Let the rust claim them. At lunch, sheltering in the service van, Benny slapped down a newspaper. Lawson and Hartnell under ethics review. Below the headline, David's firm photo-smug smile now tight-lipped, and a subhead, paralegal affair allegations trigger client exodus. I crumpled the page into the trash bin. Not our business. But no. The words snapped like a cut live wire. His chaos stays over there. I gestured beyond the chain-link fence where ordinary lives pulsed behind warm windows. We fix this. Benny nodded, chastened. That night, the house felt different lighter despite the lingering scent of David's cedar closet. I attacked the last shared space, his study. Boxes of legal journals fed a bonfire in the backyard. Flames licked the January air, devouring Tort Reform Quarterly and laminated settlement charts. Heat blistered my cheeks. In the ashes, I found a forgotten Polaroid us at Enchanted Rock, sunburnt and laughing, his hand smeared with my ice cream. The emulsion bubbled before I tossed it in. Let it all burn. The ring came next. My wedding band, too tight, since the IF hormones, required soap and force. It thunked against the bathroom sink, a hollow sound. I mailed it to David in a padded envelope with no note. Let him pawn it for Lena's coral lipstick fund. Sleep found me early, wrapped in the silence of a deader switch. No phantom buzz of his texts. No listening for tires on gravel. Just the wind combing the pecan branches outside. A lullaby of absence. The Lake Travis job was brutal, rewiring a storm-ravaged lakeside mansion perched on limestone cliffs. Gale force winds whipped off the water, snatching tool bags and blueprints. On the third day, the owner appeared. Mason Reed, no relation, but a good omen, late 40s, salt and pepper stubble, eyes the gray of weathered conduit. He hauled gear alongside us, his contractor boots sure-footed on icy scaffolding. "Transformers cooked," I shouted over the wind, pointing to charred coils in the main panel. "Need a 500 kV unit yesterday." Mason squinted at the specs. "Got one in my Austin warehouse. Installed it myself last year." He rattled off voltage tolerances with unnerving precision. "You an engineer?" I asked, securing a flapping tarp. Structural engineer turned developer. He steadied a ladder as Benny ascended. "Know my way around a meter." Wife called it obsessive. His gaze flickered to my bare ring finger. Ex-wife now. A shared current passed between us. Not attraction, yet. Recognition. By week's end, the mansion glowed. Mason handed me a check beneath the restored portico. "Fastest crew I've seen." "You run a tight ship, Reed." "Control the variables," I shrugged. "Weather's the only wild card." He smiled, crinkles deepening. "Ever consider contract work? I've got 6 historic renos needing someone who understands old bones and new codes." Benny elbowed me. "Take it." I hesitated. David's ghost whispered, "Don't overextend." But David was ash in a landfill. "Send me the specs," I said. Valentine's Day dawned brittle and clear. I ignored the floral delivery vans swarming the neighborhood. Instead, I drove to the hill country, to the derelict farmhouse Mason wanted salvaged. Rot sagged the porch. Mice nested in the knob and tube wiring. Perfect. Inside, sunlight speared through bullet holes in the tin roof, illuminating dust motes dancing like sparks. I traced the main beam solid oak, century-old, when footsteps echoed. Mason stood in the doorway, 2 steaming paper cups in hand. "Figured you'd be here." He handed me coffee. "No cream, 3 sugars." "Benny's intel," I sipped. "Perfect." Assessing the load paths. "This beauty's got good bones under the neglect." Like all worthy things. He crouched beside me, examining the fuse box. "See this?" He pointed to a hand-forged nail securing a junction. "Pre-war craftsmanship. They built to last." His shoulder brushed mine. Warm, solid. No flinch, no static. We walked the land, discussing seismic retrofits and sub-panels. Near the dry creek bed, he paused. "David Lawson. That was your ex?" Ice shot through my veins. "Yes." He represented my neighbor in a boundary dispute. Tried to bully her into settling. Mason kicked a limestone chunk. "Saw him at Whole Foods last week. With a blonde. Lena. Coral lips, probably." I watched a hawk circle overhead. "Hope he bought her overpriced kombucha." Mason laughed, a low, resonant sound that vibrated in the cold air. "I bought a chainsaw instead." Healthier investment. By dusk, we'd drafted a rewiring plan on the hood of his truck. When he drove away, taillights winking through cedars, I realized I hadn't thought of David once in 3 hours. Back at the garage, I hung Mason's farmhouse key on a fresh hook beside the lightning bolt brooch. 2 keys, 2 sparks in the order dark. I plugged in the jukebox. This time, I played at last. The substation flood had left a carcass of mud-caked transformers and frayed cables, a disaster zone humming with the growl of diesel generators and shouted orders. Knee-deep in slurry, I wrenched a corroded grounding rod while sleet needled my neck. Benny tossed me a thermos. "Coffee's black as burnt insulation today, boss." Perfect. I gulped the bitter heat, watching my breath fog the air. Reed electric crews swarmed like worker ants under portable halogens, my name stitched on every sleeve. 3 weeks since mediation. 3 weeks of burying myself in conduit bends and fault tracing until muscle memory overrode heartache. David's tools had sat curbside in the rain until scrap metal collectors took them. Let the rust claim them. At lunch, sheltering in the service van, Benny slapped down a newspaper. Lawson and Hartnell under ethics review. Below the headline, David's firm photo-smug smile now tight-lipped and a subhead, Paralegal affair allegations trigger client exodus. I crumpled the page into the trash bin. Not our business. But no. The words snapped like a cut live wire. His chaos stays over there. I gestured beyond the chain-link fence where ordinary lives pulsed behind warm windows. We fix this. Benny nodded, chastened. Us. That night, the house felt different lighter despite the lingering scent of David's cedar closet. I attacked the last shared space, his study. Boxes of legal journals fed a bonfire in the backyard. Flames licked the January air, devouring Tort Reform Quarterly and laminated settlement charts. Heat blistered my cheeks. In the ashes, I found a forgotten Polaroid us at Enchanted Rock, sunburnt and laughing, his hand smeared with my ice cream. The emulsion bubbled before I tossed it in. Let it all burn. The ring came next. My wedding band, too tight, since the IF hormones, required soap and force. It thunked against the bathroom sink, a hollow sound. I mailed it to David in a padded envelope with no note. Let him pawn it for Lena's coral lipstick fund. Sleep found me early, wrapped in the silence of a deader switch. No phantom buzz of his texts. No listening for tires on gravel. Just the wind combing the pecan branches outside. A lullaby of absence. The Lake Travis job was brutal, rewiring a storm-ravaged lakeside mansion perched on limestone cliffs. Gale force winds whipped off the water, snatching tool bags and blueprints. On the third day, the owner appeared. Mason Reed, no relation, but a good omen, late 40s, salt and pepper stubble, eyes the gray of weathered conduit. He hauled gear alongside us, his contractor boots sure-footed on icy scaffolding. Transformers cooked, I shouted over the wind, pointing to charred coils in the main panel. Need a 500 kiva unit yesterday. Mason squinted at the specs. Got one in my Austin warehouse. Installed it myself last year. He rattled off voltage tolerances with unnerving precision. You an engineer? I asked, securing a flapping tarp. Structural engineer turned developer. He steadied a ladder as Benny ascended. Know my way around a meter. Wife called it obsessive. His gaze flickered to my bare ring finger. Ex-wife now. A shared current passed between us. Not attraction, yet. Recognition. By week's end, the mansion glowed. Mason handed me a check beneath the restored portico. Fastest crew I've seen. You run a tight ship, Reed. Control the variables, I shrugged. Weather's the only wild card. He smiled, crinkles deepening. Ever consider contract work? I've got 6 historic renos needing someone who understands old bones and new codes. Benny elbowed me, take it. I hesitated. David's ghost whispered, don't overextend. But David was ash in a landfill. Send me the specs, I said. Valentine's Day dawned brittle and clear. I ignored the floral delivery vans swarming the neighborhood. Instead, I drove to the hill country, to the derelict farmhouse Mason wanted salvaged. Rot sagged the porch. Mice nested in the knob and tube wiring. Perfect. Inside, sunlight speared through bullet holes in the tin roof, illuminating dust motes dancing like sparks. I traced the main beam solid oak, century-old, when footsteps echoed. Mason stood in the doorway, 2 steaming paper cups in hand. Figured you'd be here. He handed me coffee. No cream, 3 sugars. Benny's intel, I sipped. Perfect. Assessing the load paths. This beauty's got good bones under the neglect. Like all worthy things. He crouched beside me, examining the fuse box. See this? He pointed to a hand-forged nail securing a junction. Pre-war craftsmanship. They built to last. His shoulder brushed mine. Warm, solid. No flinch, no static. We walked the land, discussing seismic retrofits and subpanels. Near the dry creek bed, he paused. David Lawson. That was your ex? Ice shot through my veins. Yes. He represented my neighbor in a boundary dispute. Tried to bully her into settling. Mason kicked a limestone chunk. Saw him at Whole Foods last week. With a blonde. Lena. Coral lips, probably. I watched a hawk circle overhead. Hope he bought her overpriced kombucha. Mason laughed. A low, resonant sound that vibrated in the cold air. I bought a chainsaw instead. Healthier investment. By dusk, we'd drafted a rewiring plan on the hood of his truck. When he drove away, taillights winking through cedars, I realized I hadn't thought of David once in 3 hours. Back at the garage, I hung Mason's farmhouse key on a fresh hook beside the lightning bolt brooch. 2 keys, 2 sparks in the order dark. I plugged in the jukebox. This time, I played at last. Cedar pollen hung thick as solder smoke in the farmhouse air, gilding the sunbeams slicing through new window frames. Mason's crew shouted over circular saws as I terminated the last feeder cable in the upgraded panel, a symphony of copper and confidence. The lightning bolt brooch gleamed from its magnetic perch beside the main breaker, witness to amps surging through revitalized bones. Benny wiped sweat from his brow, eyeing Mason hoisting floor joists across the room. Guys got shoulders like a switchgear. You two? Focus, I snapped, heat prickling my neck. Phase alignments off by 3 degrees on panel B. He chuckled. Avoidance's a load imbalance, boss. Mason approached, blueprints rolled in his calloused hand. Laundry room's ready for rough-in. His sleeve brushed my arm as he pointed to conduit stubs protruding from fresh drywall. Need home runs to here, right? Correct. I marked the blueprint, acutely aware of his work warmth radiating through my shirt. Sawdust clung to his stubble like frost. You're precise for a structural guy. Learned from the best. He tapped my voltage tester clipped to his belt. My tester. Lifted weeks ago. Forgot to return it. The air crackled. Benny coughed loudly. Gonna check the grounding grid. Alone in the laundry nook, Mason leaned against studs. David called again. My jaw tightened. Persistent pest. Said he's moving to Chicago. Wanted your blessing. I stripped 12-gauge wire with unnecessary force. Blessings are for churches, not cheaters. Also said, Mason hesitated, voice lowering. The IVF failures broke him. That he cheated because you seemed unreachable in your grief. Plink, my stripper nicked copper. The scent of blood mixed with sawdust. He doesn't get to rewrite history, I whispered. I was drowning, he handed me an anchor. Mason's thumb grazed my bleeding fingertip. A grounding touch. Anchors can be cut loose. Outside, thunder growled. Benny yelled from the porch. Transformer blew down on Elm Street. Utilities begging for help. Rain lashed the crippled neighborhood. A downed line snaked across flooded asphalt, spitting blue hatred into the dusk. Police lights strobed against boarded-up bodegas. Benny and I suited up in rain-slickered silence, the scent of ozone sharp as shattered glass. Madison? David's voice cut through the downpour. He stood under a gas station awning, suitcase dripping, eyes hollow. My flight's canceled. Saw the outage. Benny stepped between us. Not now, Lawson. David's gaze dropped to my gloves, Mason's gloves borrowed when mine split mid-repair. Who do you belong to now? He rasped. The question hung like a severed power line. I belong, I said slowly, to the woman rebuilding herself. Not yours. He flinched as if struck. I just wanted. Clear the area. A lineman shouted. We worked through the night. David watched from behind caution tape, a ghost haunting his own life's wreckage. At dawn, as we restored the last circuit, he vanished like a bad signal. Mason found me asleep against my van's tire at sunrise, mud-caped and shivering. He draped his Carhartt jacket over me, warmth infused with pine pitch and sweat. Benny said you kicked David out of your headspace mid-outage. Prioritize the live wire, I mumbled into the fleece lining. Good woman, he handed me a thermos. Peach tea. 3 sugars. We sat on the tailgate watching steam rise from manholes. The brooch weighed heavy in my pocket. David mentioned the IFF, I said. How I went cold. Mason stared at the horizon. My ex blamed me for her miscarriages. Said my stress poisoned her womb. His knuckles whitened around his thermos. Grief warps people. Makes them swing hammers at anything that feels like cause. The admission hung between us. A shared scar laid bare. I'm sorry, I whispered. He bumped my shoulder gently. Not your fault. At the farmhouse, I mounted the brooch inside the new panel. Flash to you, you're staying, men? Mason asked, watching me secure the cover plate. Lightning's part of a house's history. I flipped the main breaker. Lights bloomed through every window. Clean, unwavering. doesn't mean it defines the current. He reached for my hand. Not tentative. Certain. His palm was rough as breaker box steel, warm as load-bearing sunlight. No flinch, no static, just parallel paths converging. July heat warped the farmhouse air into liquid amber, thick with the scent of curing polyurethane and hot copper. Mason's crew had retreated to shade, leaving us alone in the skeletal kitchen where new oak cabinets stood like sentinels awaiting orders. I traced the freshly sanded countertop, soapstone, he'd insisted, cool to the touch, like river stones when the lead track lights flickered. Voltage drop, I muttered, flipping open the sub-panel. The brooch glinted beside the meter. Or ghosts. Mason leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. Sawdust powdered his boots like powdered sugar. Old Man Jones's wife died right where you're standing. Heart attack mid-biscuit dough. Charming. I probed the neutral bus bar. Tell me that after I install the under-cabinet lighting. He laughed, handing me a sweating glass of sun tea. Benny's orders. Hydrate or electrocute, he said. The tea tasted of mint and nostalgia. My mother's recipe. Benny, the traitorous matchmaker. We worked in companionable silence, him securing crown molding, me diagnosing the flicker. His hammer falls synced with my multimeter beeps, a percussion section for our private symphony. When I isolated the fault, a nicked conductor in the attic crawlspace he followed without question, crawling through insulation clouds that clung like gray snow. Here, I pointed my headlamp at the damaged wire. Rats chewed through. He squinted. Rat or raccoon? Judging by the tooth gap. Divorce lawyer. His chuckle stirred dust motes. We spliced the wire shoulder to shoulder, our breaths fogging the beam of light. His pinky brushed mine as we twisted wire nuts. Accidental? Electric. Later, washing grit from our hands at the utility sink, he nodded at my scarred knuckles. Still hurt? The thumb? Only when it rains. Forecast says thunderstorms tonight. He dried his hands on jeans. Should test that theory. The invitation hung between us, simple as an open circuit. At my porch, fireflies winked in the crepe myrtles. David's ghost used to haunt this step. Now it held Mason's toolbox and 2 slices of pecan pie. Homemade? I asked. Bought. I weld rebar, not crust. He cut a forkful. But I remember what you like. Benny's dossier grows. We ate watching lightning stitch the horizon. When thunder shook the windows, he said quietly, heard David's firm folded. Chicago chewed him up. I licked caramel from my thumb. Lena took a paralegal job there. Ironic. You pity him? Pity's a luxury. I save it for flooded junction boxes. Rain sheeted the driveway. He didn't move to leave. Inside, I showed him the jukebox, now wired to smart speakers. Play anything. He scrolled past Patsy Cline, past our shared 90s alt-rock, landing on Van Morrison's Tupelo Honey. 2 on the nose? Try me. The horns swelled. He studied my tool wall, the brooch's new home beside Mason's farmhouse key. Why keep it? Reminder that some sparks scar, I said. And some, I touched his wrist where blue veins mapped strength, ignite. His hand covered mine. Calluses meshed like gears finding alignment. No words, just the song's honeyed ache and rain drumming the roof, a million tiny connections. He kissed me at the chorus. Slow, deliberate, tasted of pecans and possibility. Not David's desperate hunger, but a current seeking its natural path. My fingers found his hair gray at the temples, soft as coal dust. When the track ended, he rested his forehead against mine. Or place or mine. Here, I whispered, where the wirings sound. Dawn painted the garage in peach and gold. I woke to the scent of brewing coffee and Mason scribbling on a blueprint at my workbench. He'd pulled on jeans, barefoot and shirtless, back muscles shifting as he sketched reinforcement lines for the farmhouse's sagging porch. Morning. I wrapped his flannel around me. He turned, smile crinkling his eyes. Found your weak spot. Oh, kitchen GF size miswired. He tapped the blueprint. And you snore like a bandsaw. I swatted him with a shop towel. He caught my wrist, pulling me onto his lap. Blueprint edges crinkled beneath us. Priorities? He murmured against my neck. Fix the GFCI or the snoring. GFSI, snoring's a feature. Outside, Benny's truck rumbled up the drive. Mason kissed me, a promise and a punctuation before grabbing his shirt. Reed? Yeah, the brooch. He nodded to the pegboard. Move it to the farmhouse panel tomorrow. It's home now. Benny burst in, freezing at the threshold. Mason's hand rested low on my back. My hair was a riot of garage-slept tangles. Well, Benny grinned, dropping a bag of breakfast tacos. Looks like someone finally closed the circuit. Benny's grin widened as Mason buttoned his shirt, one snap still undone where my fingers had fumbled at dawn. Brought extra tacos, he announced, setting grease-spotted bags beside my multimeter. Figured y'all worked up an appetite. Mason's laugh rumbled against my back where he steadied me reaching for coffee. Subtle as a sledgehammer, Ben. Learned from the best. Benny tossed me the van keys. Farmhouse sump pump alarms blaring. Basements flooding. Rain still lashed the windows as we raced through mud-rutted back roads. Mason gripped the Ford's wheel, knuckles pale. Should have waterproofed before backfilling. Priorities? I said, checking outage maps on my phone. We had conduit to run. His hand found my knee brief, solid, before downshifting into the storm. The farmhouse loomed like a shipwreck. Brown water gushed under the foundation vents. Inside, Benny thigh-deep in the basement, wrestling a choked hose. Main drains blocked. Backup pump fried. Mason waded in, sludge sucking at his boots. Generator? Tripped GFSI. Benny yelled over the gurgle. Whole panels underwater. I slung my waterproof tool bag overhead. Kill the main. Mason lunged for the exterior disconnect as I descended the stairs. Water bit cold through my waders. The panel glowed with warning LEDs beneath the surface like drowned stars. Madison, no. Mason shouted. It's energized. Only if the GFSI failed. I plunged my arms in. Which it didn't. My gloves closed on the breaker. Snap. Darkness swallowed the basement. Benny's headlamp cut through gloom, revealing floating insulation and Mason's taut face. You gambled. Calculated risk, I corrected, yanking the fried pump. Your grounding grid held, just like I designed. He hauled me onto the stairs. Water streamed from my sleeves. Never do that again. Then stop building flood zones, I shot back, breath fogging the air between us. We worked in silence. Mason clearing debris from the drain tile, Benny rigging temp pumps, me rewiring the panel on dry land. At noon, the waters receded, leaving a tide line of mud and shame. Mason handed me a thermos lid chili again, extra jalapenos. David never trusted your instincts, did he? I watched Benny pressure wash the slab. He trusted my paychecks. His loss. Mason's thumb brushed chili from my lip, my gain. Later, inspecting the damage, we found the brooch. It had fallen from the panel into the muck, lightning bolt tarnished but unbroken. Mason polished it on his shirt. Still yours. Put it back, I said. Storms prove what holds. As dusk bled through new windows, I knelt to install the final outlet, a GFCI by the sump pump. Mason crouched beside me, our reflections warped in its glossy faceplate. Benny's taking Maria to Galveston this weekend, he said casually. Said we should use his lake house. My screwdriver slipped. That's presumptuous. He noticed your waiter's leak. His knee pressed against mine. So did I, the last screw bit home. I flipped the switch. The pump hummed to life steady, capable, ready. At the lake house, Benny's romantic setup involved a generator humming behind azaleas and a toolbox on the kitchen counter. In case, read his note beside wine bottles. Mason built a fire while I traced the breaker labels. He labeled wrong, master bedrooms on circuit 3, not 5. Priorities, read. He handed me a glass. Wine first, forensics later. We sat on the dock, feet dangling over black water. The generator's purr merged with cicadas. David called today, I admitted. Chicago's not working. Asked if I'd take him back. Mason's wine glass paused mid-sip. And? I told him some systems aren't backward compatible. His laugh startled a heron into flight. Using our jargon on him? Cold. Accurate. I leaned into his shoulder. Like your load calculations. Inside, Benny's master bedroom circuit failed spectacularly when I plugged in a fan. Mason held the flashlight as I pulled the cover plate. Aha! I held up a wire nut crammed with 5 conductors. Amateur. Benny's matchmaking needs work. His breath warmed my neck as I repaired the splice. Later, in the repaired room's darkness, his palm slid over my hip. A question. My fingers laced through his, calluses catching like Velcro. No words needed. The generator's drone faded beneath shared breaths and the lake's whisper against pilings. At dawn, I found Mason sketching on a napkin, a house plan with 2 workshops, electrical and structural, connected by a breezeway. Hypothetical, he said, coffee steaming between us. Roof pitch? I asked, tracing the lines. Steep enough for solar. Good. I took his pencil, adding conduit runs along the rafters. We'll need the amps. The farmhouse exhaled August heat pine sap and curing linseed oil baking on reclaimed floorboards as Mason hammered the last cedar shake onto the dormer roof. Below, Benny and I synchronized the final breaker tests, our multimeters chirping confirmation through sun-drenched rooms. Circuit 7 kitchen GFSI live and grounded, I called up. Mason's shadow leaned over the eaves. Copy that, Sparky. His nickname for me now, warm as the sun-warmed shingles. Ready for the grand illumination? Benny wiped sweat, eyeing the brooch mounted inside the master panel. Feels like christening a ship. Feels like paying off a mortgage, I retorted, though my throat tightened. 12 months. 12 months of sweat and spliced wires and Mason's steady hands passing me tools in the pre-dawn dark. That night, we hosted the crew electricians, carpenters, Mason's stoic concrete guy Lewis cradling a crockpot of menudo. Strung Edison bulbs glowed over the porch where David once begged for forgiveness. Now it held platters of brisket and laughter that echoed into the pecan grove. Mason tapped his beer bottle against mine. To Old Man Jones. Hope he likes what we did with the place. Hope his ghost enjoys lead ambiance. I leaned into his side, the familiar weight of his arm anchoring me. Benny hauled out the rewired jukebox. Patsy Cline gave way to George Strait. Luis pulled his wife into a swaying 2-step on the gravel drive. When Mason's palm slid against my lower back, "Dance with me, Reed," I didn't hesitate. His work-roughened cheek brushed my temple as we turned under the stars. No more counting steps. Just the hum of the substation miles away and his heartbeat against my ear. David's text arrived at midnight. Heard the farmhouse is done. Congrats. I stared at the screen, no please, no venom. Just static. Mason's thumb traced my spine. Trouble? Just a phantom limb. I deleted it, watching fireflies stitch the darkness between oaks. 2 days later, the call came, a blown transformer at the Children's Hospital Annex. Benny and I suited up in the pre-dawn damp. Mason packed my tool belt, extra gloves, peanut butter crackers, the faded, world's okayest electrician mug filled with coffee. Date night postponed? I teased, clipping on my harness. Priorities. He kissed my knuckle above the scar. Save the babies first. Feed the electrician after. The hospital basement reeked of chlorine and panic. Backup generators roared, but critical monitors flickered in the NICU hallway. A nurse gripped my sleeve. Incubators, her eyes wide with fear I knew intimately. Benny cursed at the transformer's charred guts. Full windings toast. 6-hour replacement minimum. Not for those babies. I traced the feeder conduits. Bypass through panel C, temporary loop. Madison, that's unbalanced. You'll fry the, trust me. We worked in a shower of carbon flakes. My hands remembered David's betrayal here, the numbness as I'd rewired this same basement during the divorce. Now urgency sharpened every motion. Splice. Insulate. Terminate. At the final connection, Benny hesitated. If this arcs. Now, Ben. He threw the switch. The corridor lights surged, steady, brilliant, as ventilators resumed their rhythmic sighs. A cheer echoed from the nurse's station. Benny sagged against the wall. You're a goddamn witch. Mason was waiting in the parking lot when we emerged. He took one look at my soot-streaked face and pulled me into the Ford. Breakfast. Now, at the diner, over blueberry pancakes, he slid a small box across the vinyl booth. Open it. Inside lay a new brooch. Twin lightning bolts forged from old copper wire, fused at the base. Made it from your first farmhouse splice, he said quietly. Symbols should evolve. Benny snorted. Subtle, boss. Quiet, traitor. Mason's boot nudged mine under the table. Thought it could hang in our panel. Hypothetically, I pinned it to my shirt, the copper warm as a live conductor. Hypothetically, I agreed. That evening, at the farmhouse, we stood before the main panel. Mason held the original lightning bolt brooch, I held the new twin. With deliberate care, we mounted them side by side inside the door. Parallel paths, he murmured. Shared load, I corrected. Outside, cicadas sawed the twilight. His hand found mine, not an anchor, but a junction. Equal currents merging. The scent of rain-washed creosote and hot transformer oil hung thick as we approached Substation 7, a steel forest humming at 34.5 kV. Emergency lights strobed against gathering thunderheads. Benny radioed ahead, voice tight. Grids dancing like a drunk mariachi. Feeder 4s spiking 150%. Mason's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. Should have stayed at the farmhouse. You should have, I corrected, clipping on my voltage-rated gloves. I'm paid to tame lightning. He parked behind the utility trucks, gravel crunching beneath tires. And I'm paid to keep you grounded, Reed. Inside the chain-link perimeter, chaos reigned. A severed jumper cable spat blue hatred into the damp air. Foreman Riggs waved us toward the control trailer, face slick with panic sweat. Arc flash blew the bus differential relay. We're minutes from cascading failure. I studied the single-line diagram plastered on the trailer wall, a roadmap of desperation. Isolate feeder 4, bypass through the tertiary bus. Riggs paled. That's not procedure just exploded. I grabbed my hot stick. Mason, time me. He clicked his stopwatch tick-tick-tick as I approached the switchyard. Rain kissed my FR suit, each drop a potential conductor. Benny shadowed me, breathing ragged. Remember the hospital? Different beast, I muttered. Hospital currents whispered, substations roared. The disconnect switch resisted, corroded from neglect. I heaved muscles screaming until it clanged open. A visible shudder ran through the grid. Mason's voice crackled in my earpiece. Feeder 4 clear. Voltage stabilizing. All waged to make 4 problems and other Bs, and interactions are true to adjust it. People were called a better axe of the axes. Riggs exhaled into his radio. Thank Christ. Thunder detonated overhead. Rain fell in sheets. Mason appeared at my side, draping an emergency blanket over my shoulders. Still standing, Sparky. For now, I watched riggers swarm the damaged bus. This fix won't hold. Needs full rebuild. He nodded toward his truck. Told you I'd feed the electrician. The diner booth held the warmth of familiar vinyl and coffee-stained menus. Benny shoveled pie, reliving the flash, and Madison just wrestled that switch like... Mason silenced him with a look. His fingers traced the scar on my thumb, now whitened by years and weather. You trembled. Adrenaline. Liar. He pressed a small velvet pouch into my palm. Open it later. At home, under garage fluorescence, I unknotted the drawstring. A pendant lay coiled inside. A single strand of 4-0 copper wire forged into a fractal tree, roots and branches woven through a lightning-shaped flaw in the metal. Flaw, he'd say? That's where the light gets in. I pinned it beside the twin bolts in the farmhouse panel photo. David called during the thunderstorm's encore. Heard about the substation, he began, Chicago's wail bleeding through the line. Always chasing fires, Maddie. I watched rain blur the garage door window. It's Madison. Right. Ice clinked in a glass. Lena left. Again, took the last of the settlement money. The pendant felt cold against my collarbone. Why tell me? Because... His breath hitched. You'd have stopped me from burning it all down. Silence stretched, not even static. Say something, he whispered. I hung up. Mason found me rewiring the garage door opener at 2 a.m. Can't sleep? Preemptive strike? I said, splicing sensor wires. Storm fried the logic board. He crouched beside me, warmth radiating through his t-shirt. David? Imploding. Predictably, my soldering iron hissed. Like aluminum wiring. His chuckle vibrated in the concrete. Copper's better, expensive though, worth every penny. He stayed until dawn, passing tools in comfortable silence. When the opener whirred to life, he kissed my temple, a brand on still damp skin. Hypothetically, how do you feel about barn weddings? Benny delivered the invitation with a crate of deviled eggs. Maria's cousins getting hitched. Saturday, Mason RSVP'd for 2. Subtle. I uncapped a thermos. Whose barn? Old Man Jones's nephew? He grinned. Mason's been consulting on the renovations. The barn stood resurrected, fresh white oak beams spliced into century-old bones. Mason waited at the hay bale aisle, calloused hand extended. No suit, just clean jeans and a bolo tie with a turquoise lightning bolt. Reed, contractor. I took his arm, the copper pendant cool between us. We danced between hanging extension cords still awaiting fixtures. The band played Waltz Across Texas. His palm settled low on my back, thumb stroking the ridge of a long-forgotten ladder fall scar. Hypothetically, he murmured into my hair, I'd marry you here. The music swelled. I pressed my scarred knuckles to his stubbled jaw. Hypothetically, I'd say yes. Outside, fireflies wove through prairie grass. David's final text glowed on my silenced phone. Don't marry him. Please. I blocked the number, watching Mason laugh with Benny under the party lights, a man rebuilt from honest timber and good wire. The storm broke as we drove home. Lightning forked the horizon. Not an ending, a beginning. The storm's aftermath left the farmhouse breathing clean washed oak planks exhaling petrichor, windows streaked with lightning's cursive script. Mason slept beside me, one arm heavy over my ribs, his work-worn palm pressed where David's betrayals once lived. Dawn bled copper through the blinds. David's final voicemail waited. Madison, static, a wet cough, her said pneumonia. Funny, Chicago cold eats you alive. A clatter, muffled swearing. I keep your old zip up. Smells like solder, Lena hated it. Silence stretched, thin as failing insulation. Wish I'd been your ground rod. I deleted it. The pendant lay cool against my sternum fractal branches embracing flawed lightning. Mason stirred, lips grazing my shoulder blade. Trouble? Ghosts, I whispered. He pulled me closer. Tell him the house is full. Benny arrived as we sipped coffee on the porch. Got a corpse. He slapped a foreclosure notice on the rail. 1930s bungalow. Bank wants it rewired before auction. Mason scanned the address. Crestwood? That's David's old street. X Street, I corrected, crumpling the notice. Let's go. The bungalow sagged behind overgrown yaupons. Weathered siding peeled like sunburned skin. Inside, dust motes swam in shafts of light spearing through bullet holes in the roof. Teenagers or divorcees, Mason quipped. David's BMW idled across the street. He leaned against the fender, gaunt in ill-fitting scrubs. Don't, Mason warned as I approached. David's smile wavered. Heard you took this job. Benny's lead. I kept my voltage tester humming between us. Remember our first apartment? Half this size. He kicked a rusted tricycle abandoned in the weeds. You rewired it for ramen. Mason materialized at my side, silent as conduit. David flinched. Relax, contractor. Just saying goodbye. Say it faster, Mason rumbled. David's gaze snagged on my pendant. Still fixing broken things. Still breaking things, I countered. Difference is, I learn. He slid a manila envelope from his car. Grandma's photos. You're in most. Inside, our picnic at Enchanted Rock. My face smeared with ice cream, Christmas morning tangled in extension cord lights. The positive pregnancy test held aloft like a trophy before the first loss, the first crack. Keep them. I thrust it back. I'm building new albums. His knuckles whitened on the envelope. Hypothetically, if I'd fought harder, David. Mason stepped forward. She's not a salvage job. A beat. 2. David sagged against the BMW. Yeah. He drove away without looking back. The bungalow's main panel was a nightmare knob and tube spliced with extension cords, aluminum chewing through brittle insulation. Fire waiting to happen, Benny muttered. Like David, I said, yanking corroded circuits. Mason worked beside me, ripping out lath with crowbar groans. At noon, he pried loose a floorboard near the fireplace. Buried treasure. A mason jar gleamed, packed with Depression-era pennies and a folded photo, a woman in coveralls grinning beside a Model T, her hand resting on a primitive generator. Clara, 1934, kept the lights on. I pinned Clara to the new subpanel. Predecessor. Mason kissed my grease-streaked temple. Legacy. That night, Mason's hands mapped my spine, not searching for damage, but tracing strength. The bungalow's foundations shot, he murmured against my hip. Or new footings. Thought we'd build fresh. He slid blueprints across the sheets. Our blueprint dual workshops, wide porches, a master bedroom circuit Benny couldn't sabotage. Proposal, he said, pressing a copper ring into my palm, forged from the farmhouse's first grounding wire. Non-hypothetical. The metal held August heat and decades of safe current. I slid it on. Grounding systems bonded? To code, he vowed. We wed in November, under the barn's Edison bulbs. Benny cried into his brisket. Mason's vows fused practicality and poetry to parallel your path, share your load, and always respect your ampacity. David's obituary ran the next week. Pneumonia. Complications. No mention of coral lipstick or Tesla thefts. I burned the clipping in the farmhouse wood stove, watching ash flutter like dying moths. At the bungalow's grand reopening, now a women's trade school, I mounted Clara's photo beside the new panel. Mason wired the ceremonial switch. Light it up, Reed. I threw the lever. Every bulb blazed, steady, brilliant, incandescent. December frost etched fractals on the clinic's windows. As I traced the humming emery room conduit too close to the cryogen lines, Mason's blueprint had warned. Outside, his crew's jackhammers rattled the foundation like a persistent cough. The pendant felt cold against my skin as Benny radioed, temporary feeds overheating. Smells like Satan's toaster. I found him knee-deep in snow-dusted switchgear, multimeter dancing erratically. Load imbalance? Worse. He pointed to thermal imaging, a cherry-red hotspot blooming on feeder 2. Some genius routed it through the demo zone. Mason's tearing out asbestos next door. Mason burst through the plastic sheeting, respirator hanging loose. Soot streaked his temple like war paint. Reed, get your crew clear. My circuits are frying, I countered, gloved hand gripping a vibrating conduit. Your demo crew cut my temp lines. His eyes narrowed. Impossible. We marked utilities in orange. A hollow crack echoed overhead. Plaster dust snowed from the ceiling. Shut it down, Mason roared into his radio. The jackhammers died mid-strike. Silence rushed in, broken only by the Myrie's dying whine and a low groan from the structural beam above pediatrics. In the trailer, blueprints lay like battle maps. Mason stabbed a finger at the conflict zone. Your feeder crosses here. My asbestos abatement's here. Benny slapped down thermal prints. Your saw sliced our conduit. See the scorch pattern? Mason's foreman bristled. Your markers faded. We followed. Enough. Mason's voice cut through the tension. He turned to me, knuckles white on the drafting table. How critical is feeder 2? Feeds neonatal monitors. I watched his jaw tighten. We reroute or evacuate. He studied the ceiling, where a hairline crack now spiderwebbed above exam room 3. Support beams compromised. If we drill new penetrations, we risk bringing the ceiling down. I finished. Your call, contractor. The petrichor scent of pending snow bled through the door seals. His gaze locked onto mine, not husband to wife, but engineer to electrician. Give me 2 hours to shore up the beam. Then reroute around my scaffolding. Benny snorted. In this freeze? Conduit'll snap like, do it. Mason's palm covered my blueprints. Please, I nodded. You get 100 in minutes. Then I light this place up like Vegas. The cold bit through my far gear as we pre-bent rigid conduit over a barrel fire. Benny fed lengths into the bender, his breath frosting. Never seen him beg before. Wasn't begging, I corrected, eyeing the buckling beam through the window. Mason's crew swarmed it with acro props, steel teeth biting into crumbling concrete. Was trusting. At 1058, his radio crackled, shored. Go hot, sparky. We snaked the new conduit through icy crawl spaces, flashlights bouncing off fiberglass insulation. My fingers numbed around the fish tape. David would have evacuated, whispered the ghost in my hindbrain. David quit when things got hard. Terminals, Benny yelled as we breached the neonatal wall. Monitors blared alarms. A preemie's O2 stats plunging. Nurses clustered like startled birds. I spliced with frozen fingers, red to red, black to black, ignoring the tremor in my hands. Mason's scaffolding creaked beyond the drywall. One misplaced drill bit, one overloaded prop, snap. The last wire nut seated. Monitors flickered, then steadied. A collective exhale filled the room. Mason found me thawing stiff hands over a space heater in the intake bay. Soot and sweat had etched canyons into his face. Alive? Barely. I flexed scarlet fingers. Your beam held. Our beam. He pressed a thermos into my hands, cider, spiked with bourbon. Foreman quit, said I prioritized your lights over his crew's safety. I sipped, the heat searing a path to my gut. Were they wrong? Neonates versus 6 guys in harnesses? His thumb brushed a frostnip blister on my wrist. Had to call it. The pendant warmed between us. And if the ceiling fell? Then we'd rebuild. He said it simply, like quoting neck code. Together. Outside, the first snowflakes kissed the mud-caked Ford. He drove us home in silence, his palm resting on my knee, a steady 120 volts in a storm. The silence in the farmhouse kitchen hissed louder than steam from Mason's coffee cup. Outside, frozen rain needled the windows, a fitting soundtrack to the ledger open between us. Columns of red ink bled across the page, lost overtime, demo crew walkout, $8,200. Delay penalties, clinic retrofit, $5,500. Tay, he circled the last figure. Foreman took 3 guys to Peterson Construction. I pushed the clinic's acceptance certificate across the table, completed ahead of schedule stamped like a hollow victory. Neonates are warm, your beam held. Held doesn't pay subs. His knuckles whitened around the pen. A fracture in his calm deeper than the clinic's cracked ceiling. Benny's arrival shattered the tension. He dumped a frozen burrito on the ledger. Jean's crew quit too. Said you picked spark chasing over their necks. Mason didn't flinch. I picked lives over liability. They're pouring foundations for Peterson's strip mall next week. Benny jabbed a screwdriver toward the window. While we're rewiring meth labs. I stood, chair screeching. Enough. The pendant bit cold into my collarbone. Mason chose right. But choices, I met his storm gray eyes, need new paths. The meth lab was a decaying motel on Route 281. Ice glazed the collapsed roof as we picked through room carcasses. Benny kicked a syringe. Told you. Secondary feeders are intact. I scraped frost from a load center. Conduits salvageable. Mason crouched beside a buckled support column. Joists are kindling. Demo's suicide. Don't demo. I yanked a corroded neutral loose. Reinforce. His head snapped up. This isn't Clara's bungalow, Reed. It's a death trap. You stabilized a collapsing clinic, I countered. This needs your bones and my wires. Benny froze mid-syringe kick. You mean, merge? Mason's glove brushed the column's split wood. Hypothetically, non-hypothetical? I handed him my voltage tester ritual passing of tools. Read and read construction. Electrical and structural. His laugh warmed the frozen air. Should have bought you a ring that conducts. We drafted the partnership agreement on the motel's graffiti-streaked mirror. Benny witnessed with a stolen Sharpie, equal load distribution, no secrets in the bid books, farmhouse is neutral territory, no blueprints in bed. Mason initialed Clause 3 with a flourish. Deal. First test, salvaging the motel's service drop. Ice-weighted lines groaned like dying cellos. I ascended the wobbling ladder. Steady it, partner. His grip anchored the rungs. Always. As I cut the weatherhead loose, a rotten eave cracked. Mason lunged, dragging me clear as shingles, and ice sheeted the mud where I'd stood. We lay gasping in the slush. His heartbeat hammered against my back. Still trust my bones, Sparky? I spat out insulation fibers. Only if you trust my knots. That night, thawing before the wood stove, Mason sketched our first joint bid, a community center in a floodplain. Solar microgrid here, I traced the roof, with your seismic piers here. He captured my inky finger. David called today. The pendant chilled. For what? Reference check. Peterson's considering him. I stared into flames. David, building strip malls over Mason's legacy. What'd you say? Told them he cuts corners in storms. He fed oak to the fire. Truth's neutral territory too. The phone rang at midnight. David's slurred voice, sank me, contractor. Just like you sank my marriage. Mason hung up, wrapped his arms around me, and whispered into my hair. Parallel paths only work grounded. At dawn, Benny found us splicing the motel's salvaged feeders into our service truck. Peterson fired David. He's at bar 199, telling everyone you blackballed him. Mason tightened a lug nut. Let him. I touched the pendant copper warmed by shared purpose. New rule, no ghosts on job sites. We left the motel's skeleton behind, hauling usable copper toward the community center's blank slate. Mason's hand covered mine on the gearshift. Neutral, bonded, ready. Dawn bled rust-colored light over the community center's skeleton as frost crackled under my boots. Mason's seismic piers rose like sentinels from the floodplain mud, already dusted with December's first gritty snow. I traced the freshly installed solar conduit runs along the roof, only to freeze. Benny, my shout scattered crows from the rafters. Feeder 3's butchered. He scrambled up the ladder. 6 inches of pristine 500 mcmeter copper severed clean with bolt cutters. The raw ends gleamed like accusation. Sono fa, Mason's truck fishtailed into the lot, kicking up frozen slush. He took one look at the sabotage and radioed his crew. Lock down the site. Now. Footprints marred the mud beneath the array, size 11 work boots with a distinct diamond tread. David's tread. The same boots that tracked IF Clinic grief across our old kitchen. Benny snapped photos, breath steaming. Peterson fired him yesterday. Motives dripping like bad solder. Mason crouched, gloved finger brushing the boot print's sharp edge. Could be staged. Or he's that sloppy, I countered, kneeling to bag the copper shavings. Cold seeped through my Carhartts, biting like David's final voicemail. The sheriff found David at bar 1919 nursing bourbon in yesterday's clothes. They brought him to the site in cuffs, his eyes bloodshot holes in a face gone slack. Where were you at? 4 a.m. The deputy demanded. David's laugh smelled of decay. Asleep in my car. Check the parking lot cameras. Mason stepped forward. Who'd you sell the copper to, David? His gaze snagged on my pendant. Still playing hero, Sparky? While he jerked his chin at Mason, covers your back with lies? The deputy hauled him upright. Enough. Downtown. As the cruiser pulled away, Benny spat in the mud. Diamond tread. Perfect match. Mason stared at the severed conduit. Too perfect. Back at the farmhouse, blueprints became battle maps. Benny spread security stills. David's Honda Civic parked outside the all-night diner at 3047 a.m. miles from the site. Alibi holds, Mason grunted. Someone framed him. I touched the pendant cool fractal branches against flushed skin. Who hates us both? The answer came at midnight. My phone buzzed with a blocked number. Check your foundation pier 4. We found it by headlamp beam, a crude acid vial jammed into the rebar cage. Slow-release hydrochloric, eating concrete like cancer. Mason's knuckles cracked as he fished it out. Peterson's trademark. His crews use this for stubborn rock. Benny swore. He framed David to discredit us? Worse, I whispered, scanning the frost-bleached site. He's making us doubt our own build. Confrontation came at Peterson's gated mansion. Floodlights glared off Spanish tile as Mason hammered the door. Peterson answered in a monogrammed robe, smirking. Read. Here to beg for subcontractor work? Mason tossed the acid vial at his slippers. Your crew's calling card. Found it in our pier. Peterson didn't flinch. Prove it. I stepped into the light, solar conduit shavings in my palm. Diamond tread boots sabotaged my array. Same boots your foreman wore when he poached Mason's crew. Peterson's smile faltered. Jeans boots, size 11, diamond tread. I advanced until the pendant's copper gleam reflected in his pupils. He cut my lines, planted David's print, and tried to melt your competition's foundation. Literally, silence. Then a woman's voice from the shadows, Peterson's wife, clutching an iPad. Jean texted Brad tonight. Said Reed's build won't last the winter. She handed it over. Proof enough? Peterson palmed his face. Goddamn hothead. We drove home in silence. At the farmhouse gate, Mason killed the engine. You knew it was Jean, not David. Headlights washed over Clara's photo in the barn window, her 1934 grin defiant against the dark. David breaks things, I said softly. But only we rebuild. His calloused hand covered mine on the gearshift. No words, just the pendant warming between us as dawn bled across the floodplain, ready to pour concrete over the fault lines. The floodwaters reeked of diesel and decay as we waded into the community center's corpse. Ice chunks bobbed like tombstones in the drowned lobby where Mason's seismic piers now stood half submerged, silent proof their bones held even as Peterson's sabotage sought to rot them from within. Benny radioed from the roof, voice tinny over the howling nor'easter, solar arrays toast. Panels ripped clean off their mounts. Mason plunged a steel rod into the sediment-clogged sump, generators underwater. Primary feeds dead. I sloshed toward the breaker room, headlamp cutting through oily gloom. Then we make power. Inside, the main panel spat arcs like angry wasps. Water lapped at the bus bars. Don't. Mason grabbed my arm as I reached for the master switch. Trust the rubber, I snapped, yanking my sleeve down over gloves. Net code screamed in my head. Water plus voltage equals funeral pyre. But the neonatal wing's backup battery would die in 90 minutes. The switch clanged shut. Lights flickered, once, twice, then failed. Darkness swallowed us whole. Madison. Mason's hand found mine in the void. Static, I breathed, tasting ozone. Not failure, resistance. We jury-rigged a microgrid at dawn. Benny's truck battery sacrificed Mason's welder generator, cannibalized my solar trailer's intact inverter, last hope like Frankenstein's monster. Benny muttered, splicing jumper cables to the neonatal subpanel. Frankenstein had a pulse, I shot back, stripping 2/6 wire with chattering teeth. Frost crusted my eyelashes. Mason braced the shuddering generator against his hip. Peterson's in county lockup. Jean rolled on him for immunity. Good. I didn't look up. Red to red. Black to black. Let them haunt each other. David's last Facebook post flashed in my mind. Bound. Ald end. Clean slate. Posted 3 hours ago from a gas station outside Amarillo. Coral lipstick glinted in his passenger window. Lena's shade. Some ghosts just repackaged their hauntings. The deck inspector arrived as we energized the incubators. Ms. Vance's sharp suit, sharper eyes scanned our jerry-rigged system. Unpermitted auxiliary feed. Code violation 407.6. Mason stepped forward, mud sluicing off his boots. Like babies were dying. Are dying, corrected Nurse Lee, wheeling a crash cart past us. Oxygen concentrators on your unpermitted circuit. Vance's pen hovered over her clipboard. I handed her my license. Read and Read assumes full liability. She studied the pendant at my throat, fractal copper cradling, flawed lightning. Your husband's the structural partner, Mason and I said in unison. Her pen tapped clause 12, emergency load shedding. Fix it in 48 hours or I shut you down. That night, the farmhouse wood stove couldn't thaw the dread in my bones. Blueprints carpeted the floor. Deck's nightmare, Mason called the rewiring schematic. Benny snored on the sofa, thermal blanket pulled over his head. Hypothetical, Mason murmured, kneading the frozen ache from my shoulder. If we fail inspection, I traced the community center's floor plan. We don't. If, his thumb stilled on a knotted muscle. We lose the business, the house, everything. Outside, sleet hissed against the windows. David's ghost voice, you overextend, Maddie. I turned, pressing the pendant into his palm. Then we'll rebuild from scraps. Like Clara. His laugh warmed my hair. With less syphilis, hopefully. We met the deadline with minutes to spare. Permitted generator pad poured over Peterson's acid scars, ground fault systems, triple bonded Vance's initials inked on form. E911, she handed back my license. Still a violation. My stomach dropped. Technically. A rare smile cracked her severity. But Clara Reed's my great aunt. She'd have done the same. Benny whooped, nearly toppling a conduit stack. Mason's hand found the small of my back. Steady, steady. Driving home, he detoured past the clinic we'd saved months prior. Its windows glowed gold against the twilight. Made more than buildings here. Read. I laced our fingers over the gearshift. Copper ring meeting calluses. Made a foundation. David's final message waited on the farmhouse machine. Lena left at Bakersfield. Took the generator. Karma's a bitch with a wrench. A pause. Clara's photo. Grandma stole it from that bungalow. Wanted you to have something real from us. The tape hissed into silence. I placed the vintage photo beside our bed, Clara grinning at her Model T, forever unbroken. Mason's arms wrapped around me, his breath warm on my neck. Ghosts laid to rest? Outside, the first true snow began to fall, blanketing fault lines, burying scorch marks, making all things clean. The scent of cedar sawdust and ozone couldn't mask the clinic's antiseptic chill as I gripped the examination table's paper sheet. Dr. Vance, no relation to the deck inspector, pointed to the ultrasound screen, where a gray peanut-shaped void pulsed with a frantic, tiny rhythm. Strong heartbeat, measuring 8 weeks. Mason's hand crushed mine, his structural engineer fingers trembling for the first time since I'd known him. Alive? Very, Dr. Vance smiled. But, given your history, no job sites. Bed rest isn't negotiable. Outside, Benny waited in the service van, engine idling. Well? Mason slid into the driver's seat, the ultrasound printout fluttering from his shaking hand. Benny whooped, then froze at my expression. Bed rest? But the library retrofit, your lead, I said, buckling my seatbelt with surgeon care. I'll QC from home. Home became a fortress of blueprints and worry. I traced conduit runs on the library schematics, nausea rising with each pencil stroke. David's ghost voice. You couldn't carry the last ones. Mason banned him from the farmhouse verbally, then legally when a drunken congrats text arrived at 3 a.m. Week 12. Rain lashed the windows as I proofed Benny's panel schedule. A cramp seized my abdomen vise, tight, familiar. Not again, not now. I crawled to the bathroom. Blood streaked the tiles like failed solder joints. Mason found me curled on the floor, ultrasound photo crumpled in my fist. His work boots tracked mud across the threshold. No words, just his arms lifting me, carrying me to the truck while Benny called Dr. Vance. In the fluorescent lights buzzed like angry hornets. Dr. Vance's fingers pressed my abdomen, gentle probing. Subchorionic hematoma. A bleed beside the pregnancy, not from it. She pointed to the new scan, the peanut still pulsed, oblivious. Bed rest isn't negotiable anymore. It's mandatory. Mason's hand covered my ice-cold one. For how long? Until it heals. Weeks, months. Her gaze pinned me, no stress, no blueprints. The farmhouse became a gilded cage. Benny delivered job site photos. Mason knee-deep in library foundation muck, dark circles bruising his eyes. He's working doubles, Benny admitted, setting down groceries. Says, the library's gotta be perfect. For the baby, perfect. The word echoed in the silence. I stared at Clara's photo, her coveralls smudged, grinned defiant. She fixed generators while starving in the Dust Bowl. I'm sidelined by a paper cut on my uterus. At midnight, I found Mason asleep at his drafting table, head pillowed on seismic calculations. A single line of drool darkened the stress diagram. I draped a blanket over his shoulders. His hand shot out, grabbing my wrist. Don't lift that, he mumbled, still dreaming. I kissed his salt and pepper temple. It's just laundry, contractor. Week 16, the bleed stopped. Dr. Vance approved supervised desk duty. I arrived at the library to find Mason's crew had built an absurd throne, a padded office chair on a plywood dais umbilicaled to a space heater and intercom. Your command center, Mason announced, sweat gluing his shirt to his back. Yell if Benny touches anything live. Benny flipped me off affectionately. Already rewired the break room twice. Your husband's octi is contagious. I reviewed invoices. Nausea replaced by a new dread, the kind that coiled when Mason overextended bids to finish early. You're losing money on this job. He didn't look up from rebar specs. Priorities shifted. A delivery man interrupted, hauling a crate. Industrial-grade grounding mats? I read the label. For the nursery? Mason's ears reddened. Static shocks are bad for development. Benny's snort echoed in the stud walls. That night, lightning forked over the half-built library. Mason jolted awake at the thunderclap, hand flying to my belly. Okay, fine. I pressed his palm deeper. The baby kicked, a faint fish flutter beneath his touch. His breath hitched. Feels like a tiny arc flash. Or a hiccup. We lay listening to rain drum the roof, a sound that once meant flooded basements and David's betrayals. Now it was just weather. Mason's thumb traced the pendant between my breasts. Hypothetically, if we named her Clara, the baby kicked again. Agreement or gas. Non-hypothetical, I whispered into the dark. If she survives. His arms tightened. She will. Outside, the farmhouse's new grounding rods drank the storm deep, keeping the lights steady. Smoke hung low and greasy in the library's attic, the reek of melting PVC and ancient paper as I crawled toward the flickering junction box. Flames licked the insulation bats below, their heat warping the air like bad conduit bends. Mason's shout tore through the roar. Madison. Out now. My belly scraped the floor joists as I inched forward. 22 weeks. The baby kicked, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. Almost there, I whispered, sweat stinging my eyes. The fire had started in the periodicals room, faulty HVAC wiring ignored during renovation, a smoldering insult to every code I'd enforced. Beater 4's arcing. I yelled into the radio. Kill the main, grid's locked. Benny's voice crackled. Fire panels fried. Mason's gloved hand closed around my ankle. I'll go. No, I wrenched free. Your harness won't clear the cross braces. The pendant swung like a plumb bob. Fractal copper grazing scorched timber. Clara wouldn't retreat. 3 feet. 2. The junction box spat sparks, its cover plate glowing cherry red. I jammed my screwdriver into the latch. Outside, sirens wailed counterpoint to Mason's pacing. Firefighters hosed the east wing where smoke billowed like angry ghosts. Benny pressed an ice bottle into my soot-streaked hand. Contractions? Braxton Hicks, I lied, kneading the taut ache beneath my navel. Liar. The rhythm was too regular. Mason's face appeared in the ambulance doorway mask smeared with soot, eyes wild. Paramedics strapped a fetal monitor across my belly. You promised desk duty. Desks don't catch fire. I gripped his wrist. Feeder 4's isolated. Fire stops at the mechanical room. He flinched as the monitor's speaker emitted static, then a rapid thump-thump-thump. The baby's heartbeat, amplified. Alive. Angry. See? I forced a smile. Strong grounding. His palm pressed the monitor's speaker to his ear like a seashell. She's cursing us in Morse code. The hospital triage bay reeked of antiseptic and adrenaline. Dr. Vance scanned the ultrasound while Mason traced stress fractures in the ceiling tiles. Hematoma's stable, she announced. But this, she pointed to the monitor tracing, is preterm labor, brought on by smoke inhalation and, her gaze sharpened, overexertion. Mason's pen snapped. How long? Bed rest. Real bed rest. She leveled a finger at me. No radios, no schematics. Breathe. Home became a prison of pillows and fetal Dopplers. Benny delivered updates in whispers. Fire stopped where you said. Mason's rebuilding the East Wing himself. He left blueprints rolled like contraband in the umbrella stand. I resisted for 3 days. Then, sleepless at 3 a.m., I unrolled them. Mason's handwriting filled the margins. Replaced all PVC with metal-clad, added 3 redundant fire breaks here. Grounding grid doubled beneath the last beam, for Clara. And her mom. He returned at dawn, reeking of char and exhaustion. I met him at the door, blueprint in hand. Beam G7 needs cross-bracing. Your fix won't hold. Silence. Then he lifted my chin. You knew? Benny's a terrible spy. He pulled a revised sketch from his coat, cross-braces intersecting in a star pattern exactly my unsent correction. Wanted you to choose us over the job. The baby kicked, a sharp rebuke. I did choose us. Isolating that feeder saved the whole block. And risked her. His fist slammed the doorframe. Plaster dust snowed onto his boots. I can't lose you both to a junction box. The fetal monitor's readout fluttered on the counter steady green peaks. I placed his hand over the kick. You rebuilt the library for us. Let me protect it with you. Even from bed. His forehead pressed against mine. How? Hypothetically, I kissed his soot-gritted lips. You could install a live feed camera. In the attic. The camera arrived at noon, industrial-grade, zoom-controlled from my tablet. I directed Mason's crew through the lens like a bomb squad. Left. The 3-inch conduit. No, your other left, Benny. Mason grinned up at the lens, securing the last fire break. She's worse than Vance. At dusk, he mounted the camera's final bracket beside the restored attic beam. On screen, his calloused finger tapped the lens. A surrogate touch. Behind him, the setting sun ignited the smoke-damaged stained glass into a kaleidoscope of defiant light. Clara's view, his voice rasped through the speaker. I zoomed in. Carved into the charred timber beside the camera, fresh knife marks spelled M+C est. 2024, the baby somersaulted. A joyful arc flash in the dark. The contraction timer app pulsed red on my tablet 4 minutes apart, overlaying Benny's live feed of the library's final inspection. Mason stood rigid in the atrium, Vance's deck clipboard tapping against her thigh as she scrutinized firebreak seals. Rain sheeted the stained glass rose window, drenching the grand reopening tomorrow banner in gloom. Breathe through it, the obstetrician's voice ordered through my earbud. Don't tense. Easy for her to say. Vance was circling panel L7, my redesign after the fire, where a grounding strap flirted with code minimum clearance. Madison? Mason's whisper vibrated in my comm's earpiece. Status. Stalled at 6 centimeters, I hissed back, kneading the cramp beneath Clara's furious kicks. Keep Vance away from conduit riser B. The splice is tight, but... Read. Vance's voice cut through, sharp as stripped wire. Plain this deviation. On screen, her finger stabbed my improvised conduit hanger, a custom bracket forged from salvaged steel. Code requires listed hardware. Mason stepped forward, blocking her view. Emergency rebuild. Filed variance 9BSE denied last Thursday. Vance snapped. This fails. Another contraction seized me, 3 minutes. The tablet clattered to the floor. I fumbled for the comms button. Tell her, Clara Reed installed the original hangers in 1934 with scrap iron and grit. Panting, I added, show her the photo. Silence. Then Vance's tight voice, who's Clara? Benny's truck skidded into the driveway as lightning split the sky. He burst inside, dripping onto the fetal monitor printouts. Mason stalling. Vance wants the hanger specs now. Drawer, workbench, I gritted out. Yellow envelope. He returned with Clara's 1934 photo, her grinning beside the Model T generator, welding torch in hand, and a brittle invoice, custom hangers, salvage rail steel, 0, 0. Labor, Clara Reed. Fax it, I ordered as thunder rattled the nursery windows. The half-built crib trembled in the gale. Benny hesitated. Mason said rush you to the hospital if, fax it now. Then drive. On screen, Vance studied Clara's invoice under her flashlight. Mason stood statue still, rain dripping from his hard hat. Your wife's namesake? Vance asked. Inspiration, he corrected. We rebuild like she did with what's left. Vance's pen hovered. The contraction hit like a sledgehammer, 2 minutes. I cried out, fingers scrambling to mute the mic. Too late. Mason's head whipped toward the camera. Madison? Vance sighed, snapping the clipboard shut. Tell your wife, her variance is approved. She scrawled, accepted, historical precedent across the form. Now get out of here, Reed. Mason didn't wait. He sprinted for his truck, the live feed showing nothing but rain-blurred taillights. Benny drove through flooded streets, windshield wipers fighting the downpour. Breathe, boss, breathe. Putt, camera, nursery, I demanded, clutching his phone. The nursery cam flickered to life, stormlight bleeding through the window, illuminating Clara's unfinished crib and the pendant hanging from its rail fractal tree and flawed lightning. Mason, I gasped into his voicemail. Don't risk the roads. Watch her, from here. Labor room lights glared. Dr. Vance, the OB, not the inspector, barked orders. Cords wrapped, fetal distress. Prep for or, no, I choked. She needs time. The nursery cam feed still glowed on Benny's phone, a fragile tether. Mason's truck was trapped behind a downed power line, his face a pale blur on FaceTime. "I'm here," he rasped. "Look at me, not the storm." I fixed on his pixelated eyes. "Tell Clara, her namesake, never quit." "Neither do Reed's," he vowed. They wheeled me toward surgery. Benny pressed the phone to my ear. Mason's voice cracked. "Parallel paths, remember? You're not alone in the dark." The OR doors swung shut. I woke to silence. No fetal monitor. No storm. Just antiseptic stillness and Mason's hand cradling mine. His knuckles split, dried blood rust brown on his sleeve. "Clara?" My voice scraped raw. He lifted a bundle from the bassinet. Tiny, red-faced, wires snaking beneath her striped hat to a humming monitor. 5 pounds. Fierce. All on strings. He placed her on my chest. Warmth and weight and wonder. Or heart. Strong. He traced the pendant where it lay against Clara's blanket. Like her grounding. Benny burst in, library keys jingling. Vance signed the final cert. "We're?" He froze, eyes widening at Clara. "Whoa. Mini-boss." Mason's laugh was a rumble I felt through Clara's bones. Outside, dawn ignited the stained glass window across the hall, casting fractured rainbows over our daughter's face. The storm had passed. The lights held. The NICU's antiseptic hum merged with the beep of Clara's cardiac monitor, a fragile symphony beneath fluorescent glare. Mason's calloused finger traced the incubator's access port, his other hand sketching seismic reinforcements for the hospital's foundation on a napkin. Outside, dawn bled across the parking lot where Benny slept in his service van. Library reopening banner draped over the seats like a shroud. "Should be there," Mason muttered, crumpling the sketch. "Your moment." I adjusted the copper bracelet on Clara's wrist woven from the farmhouse's grounding wire, its ends fused with silver solder. Her moment's here, hold her. The nurse guided his hands through the port. Clara's miniature fingers closed around his pinky, a reflex as primal as a circuit closing. Her monitor steadied. "Strong grip," he breathed. "Read jeans," I said, leaning into his shoulder. The scent of library smoke still clung to his jacket, layered with new milk and disinfectant. Benny stumbled in, clutching 2 coffees and a manila envelope. "Vance left this. For after." He nodded at Clara. "Said you earned the quiet." Inside, the library's final certificate, inspected and approved, stamped over Clara's 1934 photo. Vance had scribbled beneath, "Tell the kid her great-great-aunt would have toasted with turpentine." Mason's laugh vibrated against me. "We'll use cider." The library reopened without us. Benny live-streamed it on his tablet. Community members flooding the restored atrium. Children's hands tracing the fire-scarred beam where M+M+C gleamed under new varnish. Sunlight ignited the rose window, scattering rainbows over the periodicals section I'd saved. "Speech," the crowd chanted. Benny panicked, shoving the tablet at Mrs. Vance. She cleared her throat, deck badge glinting. "This building survived arson, floods, and bureaucratic hell because 2 stubborn people refused to let beauty die." The camera panned to our carved initials. Reed and Reed didn't just rebuild walls. They grounded us in what matters. Off-screen, Mason's crew roared. David's letter arrived that afternoon, postmarked Bakersfield, saw, weeks old. Benny almost trashed it. "Ghosts don't get forwarding addresses." "Let her choose," Mason said quietly. I opened it in the hospital garden. Clara's incubator wheeled into dappled sunlight. No apologies. Just a faded Polaroid, David and me at 25, knee-deep in our first apartment's wiring mess, laughing over tangled extension cords. On the back, his shaky script, "Found this cleaning the Honda. You looked happiest elbow-deep in chaos. I'm sorry I became the chaos. Keep the lights on, Maddie." DD wind rustled the oaks. Clara's monitor chirped, a steady 120 BPM. I tucked the photo beneath her blanket, beside Clara's invoice. 3 generations of Reeds, I thought, fixing what others discard. We brought Clara home on a Tuesday. The farmhouse smelled of lemon oil and Benny's disastrous meatloaf. Mason carried her over the threshold. "Solid foundation first," he joked, but his hands trembled. Her nursery glowed, Mason's seismic-rated crib, Benny's haphazard mural of smiling transformers. Clara's pendant hung above the changing table. I knelt, testing every outlet with my voltmeter. GFC functional, no voltage drops. Obsessive, Mason murmured, settling Clara into my arms. Thorough, I corrected. Her eyes, Mason's storm gray, blinked up at us. Tiny fingers brushed the copper bracelet. At midnight, I found Mason in the garage. Blueprints for the floodplain community center covered the workbench, our first post-Clara job. He'd redrawn the solar array, adding a substation-sized clear zone labeled Clara's Future Treehouse. Hypothetical, he said, not turning. Non-hypothetical. I pressed the ultrasound printout over the treehouse zone. She'll need 200 amp service for her robotics lab. His laugh echoed off the rafters. Priorities. We walked the perimeter of our land at dawn, Clara strapped to my chest. Mist rose from the creek where David once promised forever. Now the silence belonged to woodpeckers and distant transformers. At the property line, Mason halted. Here, he drove a copper-clad stake into the soil grounding rod for the treehouse, then slid a second bracelet onto my wrist, matching Clara's. Parallel paths. The rising sun ignited the pendant at my throat. Flawed lightning held fast by fractal roots. Clara sneezed, a tiny, perfect spark. Ready? Mason asked, nodding toward the community center site. Light it up, I said.